I'm Ciara and I'm your host for Wenite today. I think one expectation I had of the industry was that if I knew a role particularly well in one company I would know what I was doing in another, and in reality that's just not the case at all. I think a lot of, in particularly pharma industry, but contract research organizations as well, they're all so different in the way they approach their daily process. They have completely different roles, completely different titles. Everybody is involved in a different aspect of something between one company and the next. And I think this is quite a common trend in large pharma companies where they're old companies that have been established for a really, really long time. So through no fault of their own, they get quite set in their ways that this particular person does this particular job. And then in another company, that person is doing a completely different job, but they have the same title. That's a lot of stuff. Hi, I'm Ciara and I work as a clinical research assistant in a large pharma company. I represent the S in STEM and I've been working in this industry for about 3 years. So for my degree, I studied an undergrad in general science with a specialty in pharmacology in University College Dublin in Ireland, and I did my master's in clinical pharmacology in King's College London. So I did my degree in science because my mom was a scientist and she instilled in me from a really young age, not just to learn that something happens, but why it happens. So I became quite interested in trying to figure out the reasons behind the world, why the world makes sense, and also in sort of medicine and sort of helping how science improves the world around us. When I started though, I knew I liked science, but I didn't know exactly what field I wanted to go into. So in my university in Ireland, we had this omnibus science degree where you could kind of go in and you didn't have a set path on exactly what science you had to do, but you could kind of try and test all the different departments. So I did I went in thinking I was going to do zoology, loved animals, did 1 semester of it, absolutely hated it so much. I thought I was going to get to go to the zoo. Instead, I just had to dissect fish all the time. I hated it, but at least I got to learn that. I had to do physics, chemistry, but on top of that, I got to do other sort of life sciences like biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, pharmacology, which is the one I ended up choosing. So at the end, even though I had no idea what pharmacology even was when I came in, by the time I came out of it, I was like, I'm pretty sure this is what I want to do. So, I had 2 reasons. Number one, I did my minor in cell and molecular biology, and even though that was really good, I loved it a lot. When I saw in terms of career progression where I could go with that, I only really saw kind of academia, and that wasn't really where I wanted to go. I wanted to do something that was a bit more practical, and if I'm honest, I wanted something that was employable and that could make me some money. That's the honest truth. I went in there being like, okay, well, what can I actually get a job out of? And that was the one. And also, I do think it translates science at its basic core into the world around us. So we had a career day in my general science program. Before we specialized, we got to have meetings with all of the different faculty heads, and you could sit down and kind of talk to them about why you would choose their field. And when I spoke to the heads of the department, it just seemed like it made sense in terms of translating the science that I've already learned into a practical environment. And I didn't get that same level of understanding from the other department heads that I could translate this into a real job. Yeah, I mean, I knew I wasn't gonna get into the industry with just an undergrad. I knew I had to do some further study, but by the time my undergrad was finished, I was so worn out by my thesis that I just couldn't bear the thought of doing 4 more years, which is what it is in Ireland. A lot of people in Ireland would just progress straight into a PhD. So I sort of said to myself, right, I'll do a master's, and then after that, if I really want to continue, I can do a PhD then. So that's why I chose the master's. And then by the time I did the master's, I said I didn't want to do any more studying. I think in terms of employability, it did really help. Like, it helps in that if they see that you've done some further study, that you have a passion for it, to escalate and advance your knowledge, to get a further understanding that's past a basic science level. Because what I'm trying to say is I think people need to pick their masters really carefully. I picked it because I thought I needed a master's to get where I needed to go. Looking back on it now, I don't think I really did. I think if I got my foot in the door another way, it would have worked out eventually, but I'd be lying if I said my master's didn't help. So I think where I went wrong was that in Ireland and in the UK, I think there's a different level of learning in undergrad and postgraduate. And I went to King's College London, which is a huge international university. And I think to compensate for the different levels of education in those countries, I think they spent the first half of the year sort of starting from scratch. So in many ways, I felt like I was repeating a lot of my undergrad for the first half of the year. Second half of the year was great. I learned a lot more because you learn about pharmacology from a clinical perspective and learning about sort of ethics committees and regulatory affairs, which is something you're never going to get in your undergrad learning. But I think that first half of the year I was a bit disappointed because I was sort of just recapping what I'd already learned. It may have been different if I did my postgrad in Ireland, if I'm honest. We have to remember that college in Ireland is free. Uni, other than the registration fees. So my dad was like, well, I didn't pay for your undergrad, so I'll pay for your postgrad. I knew that I had a better chance of getting into the workforce from a strong point of view if I had a master's degree. So I didn't really start thinking about it properly until about halfway through my master's. And I was sort of looking around, but I had no idea what to look for. Because like the learning was great, but I don't think they had a great program for sort of helping you get employment afterwards. I think other unis are better. So for instance, my undergrad uni are still reaching out to me saying, hey, these people are looking for PhD students, these people are looking for clinical trials assistants or anything like that, and they're really good, but I didn't get that same level of support in my master's degree. And I'm still not quite sure why. The lecturers were very approachable and they had tons of contacts in the industry, but they never seemed to really go out of their way to help you get access to them. And it's something that sort of left me feeling a little unhappy with the degree in general. I think other unis are a lot better. So I hear there's a similar course in UCL. I hear their career development aspect is a lot better. But I think I would have liked if there was we went to career fairs, but they kind of only really were looking for like engineering people or data scientists, physicists, chemists. There wasn't really the same level of interest for people doing life sciences and pharmacology. So I would have liked a little bit more career support for my master's degree. Oh, 100%, definitely. The company I work for now does an industrial placement year for undergrad students in unis across the country, and they get to spend a year doing not just like sort of nitty-gritty filing work, useless nonsense. They're doing what I do now, that I've studied for Lord knows how long to get to do. They're doing it on a regular basis, and these are guys that are only 19, 20. And I think you develop skills that you just can't learn from a learning course. You can't learn it from reading slides given to you by a lecturer. I think definitely I would 100% recommend going for one of these courses that has a placement component. After my master's, I'd say it took me about 6 weeks to 2 months, and that was the longest 6 weeks to 2 months of my entire life. I felt useless. I felt like my master's was for nothing. I couldn't even get people to reply to me. So I got a job as a clinical trials assistant in a small contract research organization, and I knew that it wasn't quite the pinnacle of what I wanted to do, but I knew that I could get some really good exposure and really good experience under my belt. I was doing a lot of the procedures associated with clinical trials, so taking blood samples, taking ECGs, taking blood pressure measurements, which all seems from the outsider's perspective a bit trivial, but I think it lays a really important groundwork when you progress along about how clinical trials are actually run. You can learn about it from a book, you can learn about it from your lecture on slides, but when you see a dosing day on day one, you learn more from that than anything else. When you're sitting there and you're the ones collecting the data that will eventually lead on to the late phase studies and eventually results in a medicine coming onto the market, it doesn't seem so trivial then. Because without that data that you've collected, you've got nothing. You've got no drug. So looking back on it now, it was really, really important. And I think particularly when you're in sort of those smaller companies, or when you're in one of those roles, they're really looking out for people to like take initiative and try and learn something new. And often those roles have a lot sort of side projects that you can get involved with, which really help to sort of amp up your roles and responsibilities, which can really like buff up your CV and really help in the future. So for instance, in that clinical trials assistant role, we were doing source data verification, which is a key factor in a clinical research associate, who are involved in checking that the source data is correct as per the clinical trial protocol and the company that set it up. And at the time you're kind of thinking, oh, I don't really want to take on this extra work, but it really was helpful because you start to look at the intricacies of the data that's involved in a clinical trial. And I think what I'm getting at is that these companies are really looking for people like that who are willing to sort of step out of their box and try something new and really just buff up their CV with as much experience as they possibly can. And that did quite stand to me well, because after I think about a year of that, they offered me the chance to become a study manager, where instead of doing the procedures on the clinical trial, I was actually helping to organize them and contribute to some of the documentation which is involved. And really that's ultimately led to where I am now. So getting involved in sort of the designing of clinical trials and the documentation that's involved and sort of the organizational aspects, clinical operations, has led me to get an opportunity to work in pharma, because those big companies see the importance of what we're doing. I mean, a lot of people in those industries have started there 20 years ago, and they might not have the same perspective from the ground level of how these trials are run. And I think now it's given us quite a big advantage in that we have a perspective that a lot of people in that industry don't have, because they are a lot more academic, a lot more research orientated, whereas we are much more, people coming from contract research organizations, they're much more practical. They're driven by timelines and goals, and I think that really stands to us. So currently I'm working as a clinical research scientist at a large pharma company, which is also sort of called the operations and science lead. So just like I was in the small company involved in I think you kind of think like, oh, I've done a master's degree, so now I can get more money, and I was just really naive about it. But most of the jobs I was applying for were somewhere in the range of like 18 to 22,000 pounds. I think that's like a reasonable starter salary for someone just leaving uni, even though it can be really tough to live on that, particularly if you're in London. It is worth it in the long run, and sometimes it just has to be done. The next bracket after that, you're pushing towards your like 25 to 28, and then once you reach that 30, that's when you've really made it. And then after that, from what I've seen, it just goes a whole crazy variety of ways depending on where you go. Most people, from what I've seen, because of our generation, they kind of move on somewhere else after 3 to 5 years, and that's when you can start kind of putting yourself forward, and I think after you've got that couple of years in and you have a bit more confidence, I think we have normally a better position to be like, here's what I can provide to you, so you should pay me this much money. And it kind of gives you a bit more standing to negotiate. And what I'm learning now in in the job I'm currently in, is that there are loads of people negotiating higher salaries. I just wasn't one of them. I was just taking whatever they'd give me, but really everybody that's involved in this is negotiating for higher salaries or better benefits, and that's just the way it goes. So I think you need to find that balance of, oh, but what if they won't take me because I'm asking for too much? And it's an awkward balance, but it's necessary.
What's your experience been like?
Yeah, I think when I first heard about contracting, I had no idea what it was or how to do it, really. I was contacted by recruiters for a specific job, but that recruiter only hired contracting people. And I had to sort of awkwardly figure out from him what he was even talking about and what that actually meant. So the process was actually a lot easier than I thought. It sounds really daunting from the beginning because you hear you have to, you're setting up a company and you're providing all these insurances, and you have to pay your own pensions, and you're not paying you have to pay different taxes, and if you don't pay them right, you could go to jail. That is all super daunting, but there are resources out there to help you. I think the HRMC website can actually be really helpful in terms of just how to set up your company. That's where you go. They will provide you all the details you need. You just have to send them what they request, when they request it. The recruiters that contact you for these roles, they can also be really, really helpful because they want to place you in these positions. Placing contractors is really good business for them because there's a higher turnover. You might bounce from one company to the next between 1 year and the next, and for them that means more profit. So they can provide you with a lot of resources, and they also have a lot of preferred vendors for some of the resources you need. So for instance, you need to get things like employer's liability insurance. They will have a selection of people who can provide you this insurance for discounted prices. And the recruiters can help you get set up with your documentation as well. But it depends, you have to find the right recruiter as well. What else do I want to say on that? Well, you do get paid more money as a contractor because you have essentially been bought out of your sick pay, your annual leave, holiday pay, and all of your benefits as well. So by nature, you will be getting more money as a contractor, but down the line, it may not necessarily be substantially more, because you also have to remember you have to pay your company's taxes, you have to pay into your own pension, and you also have to pay for your days off, essentially, because if you want to take a day off, you have to lose out on that money. So there's kind of these advantages are, number one, that you get to you can move around different companies over the space of a few years, and that will give you a much greater overall experience, because all these companies are so different. You can develop more skills by going to different companies, because you'll get aspects of a role that you didn't have in a previous company. Another advantage is you do get paid a little bit more, just to compensate for the fact that you're not a full-time employee. Depending on how you approach it, you could also be the director of your own company. And I don't see how that can be seen as a downside from the bank. However, I haven't tried to get a mortgage yet, so I don't know. But in general, I think it stands to you that you have your own company, that you're a director of it, you control your own finances. I don't see how that could be a downside financially. The money thing is not a myth, but it, like, you do also have to pay for other things.
Yeah.
And you have to be really careful with your taxes.
Okay.
Because you can't go to prison. Sometimes it can feel like you're not part of a company's, like, that you're not really part of the company because you're on a temporary contract. And that can kind of make you feel a bit left out of like any fun activities they have going on, for instance, and sort of like the bonding group nature of a company. It depends on the company though. Some can be really inclusive if you're a contractor, but others can be a little bit more dismissive because they might have an opinion that, oh well, you'll be gone in a year or whatever. But from my experience, a lot of these companies that do contracting, they do take people on permanently after the contract has expired. So in some ways it can be a really good opportunity to just get that foot in the door, and then you can become a permanent employee. I think that really depends on the role. I've known people to make up to £350 a day, and then I've known others who make kind of £30 to £50 an hour. It kind of depends, and this would normally be the job of, if you're going through a recruitment company, this would be their job to sort of figure out what that equivalent salary is for you. I just let them do all the negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. I think the problem with networking events as they currently are, and in particular in life sciences, is they tend to be quite cold. You go in there and everyone's sort of thinking, what can I get out of you? And what's the minimal amount I can give back? And I don't like that sort of approach. I prefer to sort of, I would love a networking event where people just sort of go to chat. It might not necessarily be about work, just get to know each other and just sort of gain those contacts in other industry. Because one thing I've learned about this job market is it's actually a really small industry, and it's not I think the people you know can really help excel. They're the ones who know what job are right for you, and you can reach out to people you know in other companies and pull off their experiences. And I think it would be great if there was a platform for us to do that in a more friendly manner, rather than just sort of, what can I get out of you? I think this is a really good platform to find out more about things like where to find the information you need, and like what type of jobs you can get, because surprisingly when you're in there it makes total sense, like the variation of roles that you can get, but they don't make that clear to you in uni about the specific roles that you're involved in and what those roles entail, and they don't make it clear the differences between that role in all the different companies. So this is definitely useful. I would have looked at this when I was coming out of uni. And it's also just kind of helpful to figure out, it's helpful to know that other people feel the same way about when they're quite lost about what they're doing. And that, I mean, we're all still kind of figuring it out. Like, I'm 3 years in, I still don't know if in 2 years' time I'll be doing this. I think that's the beauty of this industry though, that it is reasonably flexible. I know plenty of people who came into my company doing chemistry and now they're in ClinOps, and equally I know people who are in ClinOps and have now gone into pharmacokinetics. And I think it is a good industry to be flexible, and you can kind of experiment with different roles, and they are good companies to sort of play around with your career, and that is the good side to it. If I had to start all over again, what would I do differently? It's a very good question. I don't think I'd do a master's for the sake of doing a master's. I would do a bit more research into making sure that the master's I chose was the right one for me, I don't regret doing a master's. I regret not putting more effort into choosing my master's. I think in terms of my employments, I don't think I've done anything I regret. I think I really took the effort to progress my career in the right way, and I'm pretty happy with that. I guess we'll see in a few years if I still like doing what I do. What are my secret qualities and skills? I think I'm a person who is extremely self-reflective. Every single day I go home being like, did I do the best job I could do today? And then if something goes wrong, don't just sit there and say, oh, well, that person messed up and blah, 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 blah. I sit there and say, okay, well, that person messed up, but what about the way I behaved in that matter caused them to misinterpret what I was saying or something like that? Constantly self-evaluating is something that I do quite a lot. It can be a downside. It gets me, keeps me up at night. I don't get to sleep. But and also just trying to learn everything. In every role I've done so far, I've never been content to just say, this is my role and this is what I stick to and that's it. The best, particularly in clinical operations, the best way to be good at that job is to understand what the other people are doing as well, so that you can get a better context for what you're doing. I like cake. No, I love baking. I do bouldering, going out with friends and just having a beer, just chilling. I'm not sure if anyone can take my rambling, but it's worth a shot. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is always a good place. I'm usually quite active on that. Please like, comment and subscribe in the link down below.
Hi, my name is Stella Momo, and I'm a biochemistry graduate. I graduated in July of 2016. I'm currently working as a secondary school teacher, a science teacher.